Warning: the following video contains images and spoken word that may be too intense for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Any resemblance to any persons, places, or things is purely coincidental, and no factual statements are implied.
The autumn of 1916 had sunk its claws into the Western Front, clawing life from the landscape. Mud-choked trenches carved through France like infected wounds, each side a mirror of misery. On one side, the English held their line beneath sagging sandbags and boards soaked with weeks of rain. On the other, the Germans waited, entrenched in their own mire of filth and fear. Between them lay no man's land, a hellish strip of broken earth, strewn with the dead, torn wire, and the ghosts of every failed charge. The day had been another blood-soaked page in the ledger. A failed assault at dawn had left scores of English boys tangled in barbed wire or crumpled in craters. As dusk came, the trench was quieter than usual, save for the groans of the wounded and the occasional barked order. Smoke drifted lazily from shattered guns, and rats resumed their scuttling feasts. Private Thomas Whitaker leaned against the trench wall, his fingers trembling as he struck a match. He lit a cigarette with hands that still shook from hours of terror. "We should have never gone over," he muttered. Beside him, Lieutenant Ehlers stared blankly ahead. "We never should have come at all." Lieutenant Ehlers was the ranking soldier. All the other officers had been killed, or they were off closer to the front lines elsewhere. As the sun disappeared behind the horizon, an unnatural stillness fell. A low fog began to seep over the torn soil of no man's land. Not the usual damp mist that hugged the ground in the early morning, but something thicker, almost sentient. With each night, the fog grew thicker, almost like it had a light of its own. But it was cold, unnaturally cold. The men shivered in their trenches. And tonight, it was the coldest. Private Hughes, the youngest of the unit, was the first to speak. "You see that?" "Aye," Whitaker said, narrowing his eyes. "Something's wrong with it." The mist rolled in slow and heavy, hugging every broken body and crater as though it remembered where they fell. Then came the sounds, at first faint, but growing louder with every second. Cries, screams, voices, "Help me. Mother, please, I want to come home. I'm cold, God help me." The soldiers froze. Heads turned toward the field. The screams were unmistakably human, unmistakably close. Unmistakably the voices of their fallen. "Christ," whispered Hughes. "Those are wounded men. They're still alive out there." "No," Ehlers growled. "You go out there, you die. It's a trap. The Huns will shoot you before your first step. But we can't just leave them. Orders are orders." The men sat in silence, listening to the horror unfold beyond the trench. Some covered their ears, others stared blankly into the mist, their minds unspooling. That night, few slept. Come morning, the mist had vanished as swiftly as it had come. With a periscope, Ehlers scanned the field. The craters were there, the corpses were there, but there were no signs of life, no movement, no moans. "They're all dead," he muttered. "No wounded out there anymore." That day, the guns remained silent. Neither side fired a shot. It was as if the earth itself was holding its breath. When night fell again, the mist returned, and so did the screams. This time, they were worse, more desperate, more coherent. Whitaker thought he could pick out names. He thought he heard his own brother's voice, though James had died at the Somme. "I can't do this," Hughes said, eyes wide. "We just sit here and let them scream." Ehlers's voice was hoarse. They're already dead, Hughes. Whatever that mist is, it ain't right. That night, Whitaker couldn't bear it. As the screams reached a fever pitch, he tore a strip from a white sandbag and tied it to the end of his rifle. "What are you doing?" Ellers barked. "I'm going," Whitaker said. "I can't listen to them anymore." "Tom, they'll kill you." "Then let them. I would rather die than sit and listen to them." Before anyone could stop him, he climbed the fire step and stepped over the parapet. The mist took him instantly. Everything changed inside it. The world became muffled. The cries were louder, surrounding him from every angle, yet always distant, never quite reachable. He walked with his rifle held high, the white cloth fluttering like a truce between the living and the damned. Then, a figure emerged ahead, dark, upright, and moving cautiously. Whitaker stopped. The figure raised its rifle, cloth waving like his own. It was a German soldier, a boy, barely out of childhood, with dirt-smeared cheeks and wide, terrified eyes. They stood there for a moment. "Do you speak English?" Whitaker asked. "A little," the boy said, his accent thick. "Do you know what's going on out here?" The German looked around, his lip quivering. "It is the veil," he said. "The mist. It comes from them, the ones we left. The screams, they come from the veil. The dead, they can't rest. My grandma told me tales of this when I was a child." Why? Why can we hear them now?" "We didn't bury them," he whispered. "In times of great disaster and loss of life, the veil becomes too thin for them to separate and cross over. They are stuck here. They are crying because they were left to rot. They want to go home, but they need to cross over." The German soldier continued. "We hear the cries too, and our men are scared. Scared they will become a lost soul out here in the field. If we don't bury them and close the veil, their souls will be trapped here forever." The eyes of the German soldier wet with tears. Whitaker swallowed hard. "We have to do something." "Yes," the German nodded. "We must speak to our men. We stop the fighting, if only for a day. We bury them." Both soldiers looked silently at each other for a moment. "Agreed." Whitaker nodded to the German soldier. They parted in silence, each disappearing back into their respective trenches like ghosts themselves. The next morning, Whitaker stood before Ellers. "I spoke with a German. They want a ceasefire, just long enough to bury the dead." "It still could be a trick to lure us out into the open for slaughter," Ellers cautioned. "The Germans are just as scared as we are. The screams wear heavy on them too," Whitaker replied earnestly. Ellers stared at him like he'd lost his mind. But something in Whitaker's eyes, something raw and resolute, made him nod. A white flag was raised. A moment later, a matching one appeared across the way. "I won't order any man to go out there. Any volunteers who want to test this ceasefire?" Ellers called out. A few men raised their hands. "All right, off you go." Ellers waved his arm over his head towards the field. 4 English soldiers climbed out with stretchers. From the German side, a small group followed, mirroring their effort. The field was quiet, save for the shovels cutting into soil. Whitaker and the young German found each other again. They said nothing. They simply shook hands and started working. All the remaining soldiers joined in. They worked at times side by side to each other, even helping with interring the opposing side's bodies. They watched each other grieve over their fallen, and at times consoling each other with a gentle hand on the shoulder. The grief of each side was felt by all the soldiers, and the veil as well. The sun was a weird color that day, but the men didn't notice. They buried the men they could recognize with small crosses, their names crudely carved on them. They laid helmets on the unknown graves and whispered prayers over them. By noon, dozens were interred. When the men were done with their work and the last body was in the ground, both sides stopped and stared at each other. The air was thick and the tension was high. But the men looked into each other's eyes and saw the long, cold stare of death. One of the soldiers held out his hand. They all shook hands and gathered up their tools and silently walked back to their trenches. The mist did not return that night. There were no screams. The dead had been seen, honored, and given peace. Still, the soldiers slept uneasily. The living knew that peace never lasted. But the soldiers were more afraid of the mist than the enemy on the other side. But dawn came with no gunfire. Day 2 passed in silence. Day 3 came and went. Still no shots, no orders, no assaults. Commanders on both sides grew frustrated. Messages were sent. Demands for explanations went unanswered. Men dug latrines, mended boots, and talked in hushed tones. But neither side wanted to attack for the fear of becoming one of the screaming, helpless souls, trapped on the wrong side of the veil. On the 4th day, word came. The sector was to be abandoned, reassigned, repositioned. It was happening on both sides. The English pulled back. So did the Germans. The trenches remained, empty and soaked with rainwater, but the men were gone. The field was quiet. No cries, no bullets, no boots on the boards, no screams of the fallen. The veil had lifted. Not just the mist, but the veil of hatred, of obedience to death. And so, the field rested. The sun rose high over no man's land. Now neither English nor German remained. No guns, no barbed wire, just earth and silence. In the months to come, farmers would return. They would find crosses, simple and hand-carved, scattered in shallow graves. They would whisper prayers for the dead and marvel that for once, war had paused. Not because of treaties or victory, but because the dead had spoken. And the living experienced firsthand the cost of war. The field was never replanted. After the war, the bodies removed and sent back to their homelands. The locals still tell stories today of the time when the veil was thin, and the living heard the dead, and the living had listened.